Welcome. Glad that you're here. I want to take just a second to do a quick shout out, which I don't normally do, but this time I'm going to do it because I want to. So last week we had a fun little video that we showed that's also online introducing our series through Ecclesiastes. I just want to say thank you to Kaylee and Gary Webb because they did a lot of the video and then the organizing and then the putting that video together, all that stuff. So without them, we couldn't have done that. And also, every series that we do, we have some cool artwork that's up here in front, or you see it on screen, or you also see that on the webpage or social media, whatever. So Julie Case does a lot of that. I am not artistically inclined. It would be awfully ugly if we didn't have Julie and other people that have contributed over the years to help make things a little bit nicer to look at. So thank you guys for doing that. This is our second Sunday as we begin our series through Ecclesiastes, and I may have had the most questions ever on the start of a series after last Sunday. 2. And they were both about the same thing. What is GOAT? Now, if you were here last week, I threw out, I asked, I think, who's the GOAT when it comes to NFL? And a number of you, GOAT? So you might have been picturing that in your mind when I said GOAT. And GOAT and NFL, they don't go together. So I had never heard of GOAT until I was trying to remember the first time, like maybe a couple years ago. I think some player mentioned that somebody was the GOAT in an interview. And before that, maybe I'm just out of it. Maybe it's always been out there. I don't know. It's always been out there. Okay? All right. Good confirmation on how disconnected I am from reality. So GOAT just stands for greatest of all time. Okay? That's all it stands for. So we talked about Tom Brady and whatever. So this morning, we're not going to talk about GOATs. But we are going to talk about a different GOAT of all time, maybe a WOAT, maybe the wisest of all time. And he's this guy, Solomon, okay? He's the GOAT, the king of wisdom kind of GOAT. A lot of people think, even though the book of Ecclesiastes, there isn't somebody that says, I, Solomon, wrote this, but a lot of people think that it probably was Solomon for different reasons who wrote this book. So I'm going with a lot of people because they're a lot smarter than me. So just a quick little background about Solomon. Maybe you've heard of the guy, pretty well-known king over Israel, over all of Israel. There are only 3 of them that really reigned over the entire United Kingdom. And then Solomon was probably the biggest as far as wealth and all the things that he did and expansion of the kingdom. And God spoke to him, and we have the record of that in 1 Kings chapter 3. And what Solomon asked for wasn't for wealth and power. He asked for wisdom. And so God granted wisdom along with, everything else that he enjoyed during his life. And there's a verse there, a couple of verses. Behold, God says, I give you a wise and discerning mind so that none like you has been before you and none like you shall arise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that no other king shall compare with you all of your days. So let's take that literally as much as we can. Let's read that and understand this, that God meant what he said exactly, that Solomon is the wisest guy that's ever lived, that nobody before him, nobody after him has the ability to gather and to understand wise things and to be able to discern between what's wise and what's foolish. Let's just say, for argument, because you could argue, all these other wise philosophers and people that have come and gone, certainly they have these credentials, they've written these things. Yeah. But if you can argue that, you could also say, what if he was the wisest? And we can't, sit these guys down or put them in a philosophical debate or whatever. So let's just take the Bible at face value this morning and say that he is the wisest guy. So that creates for us all sorts of issues as we read Ecclesiastes and as we try to grasp what's going on. And there are lots of things that he says and he does that are confusing if we want to take him that way, if we want to say he's the wisest guy. So if we could take this passage, take this really kind of a summary introduction is what we're looking at this morning, chapters 1 and 2, if we could take what he says and kind of reduce it to a meme, all right, it might look something like this in the current style of a certain large company's ad campaign. Now, I ran this past a couple people that, well, some people might get it, and probably most people won't. But anyway, there's Solomon. All right, thank you. Believe in something, whatever you want, try it out, see if it makes you happy, just do it, it's all meaningless anyway. So some people read Solomon and think that, well, in all his wisdom, he really only basically says that. It's all meaningless, right? Throughout the book, vanity, meaningless. It's just a vapor, just a breath of air. It all goes by, and what's the point of it all, right? So you could say, as some have said, well, Solomon in all his wisdom is kind of a fatalist. Doesn't matter what you do. It all falls apart in the end. You could say he's a nihilist or nihilist, however you pronounce that word, I'm not quite sure. You could say that it really is meaningless. It is all going nowhere. So why care about anything or anybody? Because we all die in the end. So there are lots of different approaches. As people read Ecclesiastes wondering, where is he coming from? Where is he taking us in this passage? So he's not a nihilist. He's not a fatalist. He has been granted wisdom from God to be able to discern these things, but he does it in a way that we don't think a biblical author should do it. That's where we kind of trip up over this Solomon guy. If he really is, he's writing something that's God-breathed, he wouldn't say things that are so confusing or even so frustrating. Like I said last week, I had the major revelation that I never liked Ecclesiastes. I never really read the whole thing because I got depressed going into it. So what do we do with it this morning? Well, let's read the passage that's going to frame what really is the summary here of all his searching, and then we'll go from there. Anybody get that, the just do it thing? Anybody? All right, okay, good. Yeah, whatever. Okay, I'm trying here. There we go. Ecclesiastes 1, we'll just read verses 12 through 18. I, the preacher, and we're understanding it to be Solomon, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is but a striving after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. So we're going to go on a brief little journey with Solomon this morning, and it begins with this: applying the heart and the pursuit of I, in quotes. As we'll see, and many times throughout these first two chapters, Solomon speaking first person, I've done all these things. I've experienced all things. I sought to gain wisdom by doing and experiencing all these things. And always comes up to and amounts to vanity. But here's how he begins. He says he applies his heart. He applied and tested his heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. Chapter 17, verse 13, he applied his heart to know wisdom. So he gives us the impression that it's not a free-for-all. He's not just doing whatever. He's applying his heart in a wise way to do and experience certain things. So again, many people struggle with this. If he's the wisest guy, if he has this knowledge and discernment from God, why is he doing the things that he's doing that seem bad or outright immoral? And how could God put a seal of approval on that in the Bible, in other words? You get where I'm going? Well, as we read, wow, does he really need to experience these things to understand their madness or vanity or chasing after the wind? That's the frustration that people get into. So here's how we're going to understand Solomon and where he's coming from on this journey as he applies his heart. There you go, the heart. That's Solomon's heart right there. So on the one side, we have this. There's deep, there's thoughtful seeking and searching, and that is a good thing. So at least in a way, we can look at Solomon and say, yes, that is something that he's a model of seeking wisdom and discernment. We can at least say that God is using him as he seeks to teach us something about the importance of experiencing and seeking and gathering and moving forward. We have a choice, especially as believers, we have a choice to think and reason and discern. And because of that, we shouldn't be content or happy with easy or shallow answers. Okay? Have you heard of the saying, a mile wide and an inch deep? Have you heard of that? You ever wonder where that comes from? Well, I Googled that this past week, because Google knows everything, right? I wanted to, because I was trying to figure out who's the first guy who said that. And nobody knows for sure the first person to use that. But I did find that a journalist way back in 1889 said it. So maybe he's the first, maybe not, I don't know. But the interesting thing was he was referring to the Platte River, which runs through Nebraska, which is not all that interesting. But if you've ever been on I-80 from Iowa into Colorado, you've seen more of Nebraska than you ever care to, right? You can tie the steering wheel to the door and just go, right? It's that kind of wonderful state. The good life, Nebraska. So on your way west on I-80, you will cross the Platte River, I don't know how many times. Anybody know? A bunch of times, because the river meanders all the way through Nebraska. So this journalist back in the 1800s, he went out, and at first, as he, and I'm sure other travelers, settlers, whatever, as they saw the Platte River, it looks impressive. At least from a distance, because it's big and it's wide. And the first thing that settlers back in the day would think is, this is a mode of transportation. Commerce. We can move stuff down this river, right? This big river. That's what we need. Well, you get close to the Platte River, and what do you discover? You can't float anything other than something that's 2 inches deep that's on this very surface of the water. And even then, you're probably in trouble because of the sandbars. It is really wide and looks impressive from a distance, but you come up to it, and it's really shallow. In fact, as far as I know, the whole length of the river is so shallow, you can't move a boat down it to get anywhere from A to B. A mile wide and an inch deep. And so many people and authors, commentators have used that saying to apply that to all sorts of things, education. What I'm most familiar with is American evangelical thinking, that a lot of people have criticized Christians because Christians like to look impressive, like to have all the stuff, the glitter, that from a distance, hey, it looks like we got it going on, right? We're attractive and we're special or pretty significant. Look at us. But you get close and you find out what's being taught or what's not being taught or really what's going on, and it's kind of an inch deep. And, any general criticism is generally sometimes not so great. But I think, some people have kind of nailed it, that there is some truth, that maybe there's a lot of truth that should make us uncomfortable about that observation, especially as it comes from outside the church. We look impressive, but when it comes to the depth of our learning and our experience, and do we even understand what we believe? Do we understand what our own church believes? Do we really have a grasp on it? And to wisely discern what it is that we believe from what it is that we don't believe, even if sometimes the two things sound real similar, do we know how to differentiate? So I think there's some good criticism there, and something that we can learn from Solomon. We've got to be reasoning. We've got to be thoughtful. We've got to take note of what it is we believe and own it. Really understand it. Be able to grasp it. Be able to even defend it. to be able to clearly understand how it is distinctly different from other systems of belief or other religions or so forth. So I think at least on one side of things, we can look at what Solomon's doing and applying and say, yes, we need to do that. Here's the other side of the heart issue here. You can trust God's wisdom, but you really can't trust your heart. And this is where it gets confusing, maybe a little bit, with Solomon. Solomon, even though he's a biblical writer, he's not a perfect individual by a long shot. And there are some things I think we can say as we read that he goes for wisdom, but maybe he does things that aren't so discerning, that maybe aren't so wise, that you could look at and say, even though he did it, I probably shouldn't do it. Okay? That makes sense? So, here's where Scripture informs Scripture, okay? We can use other passages to see how those other passages then inform us on what's going on with Solomon and his heart. Jeremiah 17:9 says, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? If it's that deceitful, if it's that sick, then there could be times where if I really want to follow my heart, pursue my passion, whatever, yeah, there's some good to that, but it could get me into trouble if it's that deceitful and that sick. So Solomon, we can say, is just as flawed, because he's an imperfect guy, he's just as flawed in some senses as we are, open to temptation, open to confusion, open to distraction. So what happens? When you apply your heart, you go into a danger zone. Heart and pride and temptation, these things begin to wrap together. So as Solomon keeps expressing, I do this, I've done that, there is a dimension to that I that should cause us to go, what's really going on with your heart, Solomon? What is it that's behind that? What is it that you're experiencing? We can question the guy because he's just a guy. And that I has a way with all of us to get in the way of the pursuit of truth and of wisdom and discernment. So you've heard follow your heart, pursue your passions, and part of that I think is good. I think part of that could be godly. Part of following your heart, pursuing your passion, especially as a believer, as you understand your gifts, then God is at work and God is leading that and God is putting things in your heart. But there's also some things that I think we can agree on. If you follow your heart, you could get into big trouble, right? If you follow your heart, pursue your passions, and if your heart is deceitful, and if there's some wickedness in there, what in the world could our passions lead us into? There's an article I looked at recently, Huffington Post. I don't know if you read that at all. Every once in a while I look at it. 10 reasons to follow your heart. And the last reason, the 10th reason was this. Your heart knows your true desires. Okay? So, yeah. What are your true desires? I mean, think about that for a moment. If you could remove the barriers, the things that we kind of, even in our own lives, we use to hide the gritty reality and try to even pretend from ourselves, but especially from those who are closest to us. There are some true desires I have that I don't want you guys to know about. I bet there's some deeper desires from your heart you don't want me to know about. If you followed those, where would you wind up? So the author of the article paints this glowing picture of that, and I'm here to tell you, it's not always a good thing. In fact, there's a whole lot of times it's a bad thing. It could turn into an evil thing if you only, without wisdom, pursue whatever it is that your heart desires. All right, you get that? If you follow your desire completely without wisdom, the constant consumption of things in your life, the pursuit of whatever you have to pursue each day, and along with the things that make you happy, that raises the I level, just like with Solomon. I'm going to try this out. I would like to do that. I would like to experience this. Ooh, wouldn't that be nice if I tried a little bit of that? You can see if your heart is involved and if it's deceptive, how quickly that could get you into trouble, right? So Solomon tries to make it clear in these first two chapters that he did these things while applying wisdom. So we get the feeling from the text that it's not a free-for-all. He's not just doing whatever all the time. It's not all restraints pulled away and constant party. But when eye is involved and the heart is deceitful, it could lead you into some things that are in the wrong place. Is that making sense? So I'm not trashing Solomon. I'm just saying he's a regular guy like the rest of us. So you've got to consider, am I really pursuing I when I'm pursuing my heart? And where does that take us? So that's where it begins. Let's see where it continues. It continues with the is that all? Is that all there is kind of moment. So Solomon leads us there in that passage. Chapter 2, we're not going to read the whole chapter, but it takes us on kind of a summary of his journey as he's applying his heart. So as he says, he applies and he tests through personal experience all these things that his heart wants him to go for, as he says, I do this. So what does he test? Well, he lives for pleasure. He tries out wine and drinking. He pursues folly. Another way to say it is comedy. Just living a good life, going to the comedy clubs. I don't know a better way to interpret that for our time today. Drinking it up and heading to the clubs. Okay? Building projects. It doesn't all look completely selfish or self-serving, but probably in some ways it is. He wants to build up things that are lasting, are significant, not just to himself, to the community. So he invests himself in that. He buys slaves, he accumulates livestock, he has stuff everywhere. He has wealth like crazy, and it just keeps building. He surrounds himself with musicians, so the singing and the dancing continues, the parties continue, and the sexual partners are also a part of his testing wisdom. So that's where we get into, oh my goodness, what, Solomon, really? Huh? Well, the heart is in it. The heart is deceptive. The heart is leading him into the experience of these things. And he says for us, so I became great and surpassed all. And in the original Testament, we get a glimpse of how great he became. He really did. He had wealth that was unparalleled in the ancient world. He built things, he established things in Israel that were the envy of the other kings around him. In fact, they came, some of them, just to see his wealth and to hear his wisdom. So as he says, I became great and surpassed all. In a sense, he truly did. But looking at it with wisdom leads him to say, it's not just vanity, but many times he says it's vanity and a striving after the wind. In chapters 1 and chapter 2, I didn't count them all, but he says it numerous times. It's a striving after the wind. Tough word to translate. So at least some translators say it's like eating. Striving is the same idea as eating. Eating the wind, okay? He adds on to this idea of meaningless and striving. How do you get filled by eating the wind? You don't. You can keep in vain, right? You keep pursuing and keep striving, hoping that the next experience is going to fill you up. But just like you can't get filled up, you can't find sustenance in eating the wind, he says that's what his experience has been. Through all of those things, it's led him to become emptier than he was before. There's no good ending to any of that. In fact, in chapter 2, he says, I hated my life. Ever hear anybody actually admit that? He ended up despising who he was in all those experiences. When you start, I started looking up and Googling different quotes, especially from the rich and the famous and those in media and comedians, and there is no end to quotes you can find, so I skipped them. They're out there, they're everywhere. The more that people get, the more that they find they are so empty that all of those things added up to, in fact, less than nothing. Exactly what Solomon says. He literally, in his life, had it all. And he says, I hated it. I hated my life. Is that all moment? That's where all of those things that he did led him to say he despised his life. From his heart, Solomon wanted gain. Some interpreters say it's really talking about financial gain, not just gain with experiencing things, but more money. He never had enough money. He always wanted more money. He wanted more gain, more and more, better and more satisfying. That's what it seems like, right? If only I had more wealth, more stuff, then I would be happy. Then I'd give more to other people. Then I'd help out. Then I'd do service-oriented things. If I just had a little bit more, right? And what happens? A little bit more is never good enough. Because maybe if you had that little bit more, and now I need even more. That was the life of Solomon. And he says, I hate it. I hate myself. It goes nowhere. I'm sick of all that. So, and in kind of a summary thing, I listed off all those things he wanted, all those things he experienced. And it's interesting, I think, and important enough to note that you look at chapter 2 as he's seeking pleasure, and he's seeking good times, and he made things, and he gathered people, and he did all these works. It's kind of a parallel to another Eden. When he is seeking to make himself better, here's what I'm going to do, he says. I've got all this. I can get more of this. I'm going to recreate my own Garden of Eden. And all these things that I find pleasurable, I'm going to keep increasing them and keep creating things in order to eventually, make my life better. I'm going to find my way back to the garden by building another one and living in it. Now, how many times do we do that on a lesser degree? If you can't get back to the garden, the actual Garden of Eden, I'm just going to build my own and see how that works out. Well, I think that's where the chapter leads us. That's what he tried to do, and it led him nowhere. The Garden of Eden he had was empty, and it led to vanity. So, where does he wind up? Two things to focus on. And this is that all moment. Two things I want to leave you with that. Number one, paradise under the sun. And we left off last week saying there's a difference between being under the sun, S-U-N, and being found in the sun, S-O-N, okay? Throughout this book, we're going to keep coming back to that. All right? So paradise under the sun, S-U-N, is limited. It always has been, and guess what? It always will be. Now, we don't need Solomon in some respects to understand that, but the beauty and the depth and the importance of the book is we need the preacher, and here it is Solomon, to keep shouting it in our faces. It is vanity. I tried it all and I hated myself. All of these things left me emptier than I was before. I ate it up and I still could not be satisfied. Listen to me, the preacher says. If you want life under the sun, you're not going to find it. In fact, you're going to wind up dead like everybody else. That sounds harsh, it sounds dark, it sounds mean, and we have 12 chapters screaming it at us. And we're just going to keep going with the preacher because we need him and this time to plant this truth in our heads and in our hearts. We don't have to do all of those experiences, and we surely shouldn't trust our heart to the extent that Solomon did, I think, to be able to understand under the sun, yep, Solomon, you're right. And we need to take that in, take it to our hearts. So that's the first thing he winds up on that we're focusing on. And the second thing is this. Some questions can't be answered with all of the wisdom at your disposal. Let's say that you are as wise as Solomon. You've done all the study. You've read all the books. You've pulled in all the knowledge that anyone could possibly gain and discern. You've got it all in your background. You are a genius in that sense with philosophy and understanding things. Can you get to the point where you're so wise that you can figure out every struggle and every problem? The answer, at least as Solomon gives us, is no, you can't. What does he say in chapter 1 that I read earlier? Verse 15, what is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. We are limited in what we can grasp. The rest of the story under the sun is not all there. Not all the pieces are there. And that is especially frustrating for anybody who's got questions. All of us, I think, include all of us who have questions about the ultimate questions, as far as how God works, or the presence of evil, or why is it that evil people seem to prosper and God is on his throne? Why is it that there's so much struggle, so much suffering? Why doesn't God end it right now if he is a God of love and if he truly is sovereign, right? We all have had those questions at some point, and maybe you're dealing with those right now. Why can't we have enough wisdom to say, and why didn't God give us enough to come to the point where all these crooked things that are not right to us will finally be straight, will finally be nailed. We can finally get to the point where, now I get it, God. It's not all there. Not all the pieces are present in our minds, in our time, under the sun, to finally get to the point where through wisdom, through reasoning, we can understand God in a whole nother way. That's what Solomon discovered. And that leaves us what? Incomplete. Unsatisfied. Right? I mean, if you're honest, God, why didn't you give me more? Why can't I fully understand? God doesn't give us enough to grasp everything. And that's part of Solomon's struggle. It's part of our struggle. So, why are we continuing to read this book? And where is it that we can go with it? Well, that's where we're gonna end this morning. And it's kind of where Solomon wraps up his summary here in the end of chapter 2. Begins with applying the heart, the pursuit of eye. Where does that take us? Well, it continues with, is that all? And what am I left with? And what's really going on? Well, it really ends with the good, at least in this chapter, the good that God gives is enough. Solomon says wisdom is good, but it's never completely, fully satisfying. It can't answer all the questions. And in fact, Solomon says, for in much wisdom is much vexation. He who increases knowledge increases sorrow. That doesn't mean you don't seek and you don't ask questions. He's just cluing us in that because we're not going to have all the pieces, it's going to hurt. There's going to be sorrow. There's going to be a longing in some ways that is never fully satisfied. So what does Solomon do? He turns to consider. Chapter 2, verse 12. How does he say it? So I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly, and he goes on from there. Here's the interesting thing. In the language there, in the original language, when he says, I turned to consider, it means face something. If you come to the point in life where you've struggled, or you've hit roadblocks, or you've had frustrations, disagreements, there needs to come a point in time that you stop. I'm going to face up to it. I'm going to face up to those things that have bothered me. I'm going to face up to the struggles I've had, the disagreements I've had. Yep, I don't like them, but I'm still going to stop and look it in the eye and finally come to some conclusions that under the sun are meaningful to help me move in the direction God wants me to. That's what Solomon does. He stops and he says he turns to face up, to look in the eye what's going on. There's good in wisdom, but let's look at, and I think I've got the verses up here. No, I don't. So I'm going to read it for you. So at the end of chapter 2, if you have a Bible, you can turn there. Ecclesiastes 2, starting at verse 24. He says, there is nothing better for a person that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. Let's stop right there. So he's also not a hedonist. He's not saying, just go get pleasure, eat, drink, and be happy because tomorrow we're going to be dead. He's not. So many people take what Ecclesiastes says and they jump to that conclusion. I'll just go have a party and whatever. He's not saying that. What he is saying is be satisfied in the good things that God does give you. That he gives you enough. That there is something in us that Solomon says it's never enough. I've always got to have more, right? What if he's given you enough to be happy with in the first place? That striving after something else is just so much more empty when you've got something to find joy in. Because not just those things are enough, but the giver of good things is enough to give us all that we need, even right now in this imperfect place. So my family and I, we went to Iowa. We escaped to Iowa for a night, on Friday night, and we came back Saturday. Right before we left, the air conditioner in the house quit working. It was blowing air, but it's not cold air. So I YouTubed it. Okay? I find the video. I need to clean out the coils around my air conditioner. So I take the outside apart. It's gunked up. I'm like, I'm gonna fix something, right? So I get out the hose and I rinse out the coil because it's just caked in with garbage and junk and dirt. Rinse it all out, put it all back together. All the screws I started with, they all went back in. I wasn't short or long any number of screws. Go back in the house, turn it on for an hour or two. It's still not working. So we leave on Friday with the air conditioner's not working. What was it here yesterday? 90 whatever. It was like 95 in Iowa. So the whole house is closed up. All the windows are closed. And we know that all Friday night, Saturday night, we're going to come back to a roasting house. We're going to open the door. It's going to be hotter inside than it was outside. And it was, right? So the whole time, I'm just kind of, I wish I could have fixed it, and I didn't. So that's part of my issue. But the rest of it is, yuck, going to come back to a hot house. We're not going to sleep well. You just lay there and sweat. It's like the summer vacation that went wrong. And it might feel cool by 5 a.m., How weaselly and wimpy and sissy is that really? For most of established history, nobody had air conditioning until 1950, whatever, right? Then we actually had air conditioning, and then everybody in the developed world goes soft. And we think like we have to have it. I thought I had to have it. How ridiculous is that? When I came home yesterday, what should I have been thinking? I have a house. I am not on the street. I have a roof over my head. That's pretty awesome, right? And not only that, when I go to the sink and go like this, water comes out. I didn't do anything other than pay the bill. Water for me to use. I can go to the refrigerator. I open up the door. What do I have? Food. In fact, I'll never eat all of that. Like every other week, I throw food away. How many places in the world are dying? I've got a refrigerator and I throw food away. I have got more blessing in my life and where I live right now that I can ever count. And what's the one thing I think about? The air conditioning doesn't work. How pathetic is that, right? It is exactly where Ecclesiastes takes us in this chapter. Be joyful. God chose to bless you. You have clothing, you have food, you have water, you've got a refrigerator, you got a roof over your head, and on. You got cars, on and on it goes, right? We have more than what we can count, but we're never quite satisfied. If we grab ourselves and stop and think about it, we can then rearrange our thinking in wisdom and say, look at what God has given me, not just personally for me to enjoy. Look what God has given for me to bless others, to love others, to have an impact in lives of people around me and even beyond that. Look what God could do with even a fraction of my excess. And we've got a lot of excess. If we just had a different heart and how God loves us and how we are so privileged to love others, the need of others would drop through the ground. If more and more of us responded in wisdom and saw that this is from the hand of God, the hand of God is giving me more than enough. So to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner is given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to one who pleases God. In the end, sinner, wise, or foolish, it's all going to be given back. You look at it that way, in all our hoarding, and all of our, I've got to have this. Guess what? You can give it now and kind of find some joy and pleasure in that, or you can give it all when you're in a box. You're going to give it. It's going to go. So are you a part of it directly or not? That's also wisdom from Ecclesiastes that we should really take to heart. Now, ran across this quote, and we're going to end with this theme in mind. Everything that Solomon pursued, I read, this is a Mark Driscoll quote. Anybody heard of Mark Driscoll? We haven't heard from him for a while. I don't know if this is from a sermon or from a book or wherever, but he said this to somebody. Everything Solomon pursued, Jesus was tempted by, but resisted. Okay? I said Solomon is imperfect. He is, but he gives us a picture. There's a window in his pursuit that is imperfect, but then draws us to think of the perfect one. Everything that Solomon tested and tried, he actually tried. He got into, which wasn't really all that wise, for him to then finally say, oh, it wasn't that wise, and I hate myself for doing it. We don't actually have to do it. Jesus was tempted in a similar way, but he didn't try those things. He had it in his face. What did the devil do? We're not going to read the whole thing. Matthew chapter 4, devil comes to him. 3 different temptations. You're familiar with this? Number 1, fill yourself your way is basically a temptation. Look at these stones. You're hungry, right? Eat now. Why in the world are you waiting? You've got all the power of God. Grab a stone, turn it to bread, and eat. And Jesus, what does he respond with? His heart? Ooh, yeah, you're right. Man, I am hungry. That's where your heart takes you, right? He doesn't say that. He responds with truth. Man doesn't eat by bread alone. There's something bigger and better that God, the Father, has for me. Temptation 2, claim your authority now. Go way up on this pinnacle of the temple and throw yourself off. The angels will catch you. Do it now. Almost like I dare you. You have the authority to do that, Jesus. The angels have to respond, right? What does Jesus do? Yeah, you're right. Okay, I could take authority now. I am God. Does he do that? No. How does he respond? He responds with the truth of God, not his heart. Temptation number 3, take your power and do whatever you want with it. Okay? Somehow Satan shows him all the power and all the kingdoms and all the wealth of the world. I don't think that's tempting to Jesus in his heart, but here's what could be tempting. If you want to serve all and if your desire is to love all, you could look at all the power and wealth of the world and say, I could take that now and harness it for good. You could do that, right? There could be something tempting in saying the kingdom come fully right now, and we're just going to work around God the Father's plan because it takes too long. Okay? That's the heart of the temptation. Take it all now. Why wait? Nobody likes waiting. Do it all right now. Does Jesus answer with his heart? No. Again, 3 times in a row, he answers with the truth of God. Why? Because he has in his vision the Father's will, and nothing's going to stop him. No temptation is going to get in the way, even though he's tempted in every way. That's the difference. He doesn't have to go in the way of the heart when he has the way of joy. He considers it joy to give himself, to please his Father, to fulfill his Father's will. He gives it in joy, not in a regretting way, not in a way that holds back in any way. Father, my joy is your joy. I'm going to do it the way you have laid it out for me to do it. And that's what Jesus does. Tempted in every way, we have the perfect idea of what it means here to put all these other things aside and put in front of you the fullness of God, which is how we'll end. Psalm 16, verses 7 through 11. I bless the Lord, the psalmist says, who gives me counsel. In the night also my heart instructs me. So he's listening to who? Not just his heart. He's listening to how God instructs and counsels his heart. You got that? That's real key as we close here. I have set the Lord always before me, because he is at my right hand. I shall not be shaken. Therefore, my heart is glad, and my whole being rejoices. My flesh also dwells secure, for you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, to the grave, or let your Holy One see corruption. You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness, and there is joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. There is no place I can go from God, even the grave itself, where I don't want to lose track of, in my vision, the fullness of joy, because I put God first, because I've got God in my heart. That points us directly to what Jesus does for us. He lays himself aside. He, in all humility, puts everything aside so he could become the sacrifice for us out of joy to pursue the Father's plan. We then begin to see a glimpse, because of what Jesus did, and how we can have joy that's not found in junk that rots, that's not found in things that at the end of the day you say, I hate my life for doing that. We can find joy in what Jesus does. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, I praise you and I thank you for giving us this book and what Solomon does to direct us to you, where we can find joy that not even a grave can take away. And our pursuit daily, Lord, of stuff that confuses and frustrates and gets us all entangled in things of this world. I pray, Lord, as we move into a new week, that there would be a new desire in our hearts to find fullness of life that we can only find in you. The joy that we can have that the world can't take away, because it's not based in stuff. Lord, enable us and give us the strength of resolve to say that this day is yours. I'm not going to end it saying I hate my life. I'm going to end it saying, Lord, you've given me my life, and you've given me all things that I enjoy. I choose to enjoy, and I choose to worship, and I choose to follow you. Lord, give us hearts that long to pursue you in that way. In Jesus' name, amen.